This is my independent reading video on my independent reading book, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass by Frederick Douglass. And here's the book. It is 170 pages long. So what is this book about? This book is an autobiography of Frederick Douglass' life growing up in the harsh slavery of Maryland and how he eventually escapes. He starts out by explaining where his family comes from. A lot of his ancestors, going up to his great-great-grandfather, have all been born into slavery. Douglass himself was born on Home Hill Farm in Talbot, Maryland. After being stolen from his mother there, he was brought up at the Y Plantation at age 6, where he learned many of the cruelties of slavery. He explains his entire journey from then on. He got very discouraged, and at several points, he felt like ending his own life. And he got into several brutal fights with his master and beatings which almost killed him. And he also felt like he could never escape from slavery, like the fact was impossible. But as he heard more stories of slaves that escaped, he got encouraged. After being sent to an extremely strict slave owner by his master in order to correct his behavior, Douglass never gave in how cruel this other slave owner was, and tarnished the owner's reputation for beating down slaves and changing their mentality to be weak and timid and not rebellious. Frederick Douglass then makes a plan to escape with 2 other friends, but their plan is discovered by their owner. Thankfully, Douglass is able to burn his piece of paper in the plan so that they don't realize he is involved, and he throws it into the fire right when they're about to search him. So eventually he hatches another escape plan. He goes at night, he gets into a boat because on land he would get stopped a lot easier, so he decided to go through water. He escaped all the way. He went to New York first and then to Massachusetts, and at that point he was free. And he settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts, where he started his anti-slavery movements. The bulk of the book explains the cruelty of slavery and his experiences and stories, but at the very end of the book, after he escapes, it shines light on his many achievements, such as starting a newspaper protesting slavery and going around the states speaking out against slavery and encouraging thousands of people. The next question I'll be answering is, what do I like about the book? And I'll start this off with a quote on page 55 and 54. I soon learned the names of these letters and for what they were intended when placed upon a piece of timber in the shipyard. I immediately commenced copying them and in a short time was able to make the 4 letters named. After that, when I met with any boy who I knew could write, I would tell him I could write as well as he. The next word would be, I don't believe you, let me see you try it. I would then make the letters which I had been so fortunate as to learn and ask him to beat that. In this way I got a good many lessons in writing, which it is quite possible I should never have gotten in any other way. So, the method he uses to learn is so resourceful. He tricks other people into thinking that he is challenging them into a spelling competition, and by doing this, using the letters he already knows, he's able to get other people to spell out other words and letters, and by them spelling out the letters, that is how he learns the rest of the alphabet that he wasn't taught. It goes to show that he used everything he could to escape slavery and make his situation better. It teaches the reader an important lesson too, that no matter what your problem or situation is, you must always try to make the most of it and do with what you have. You never know what could happen if you just try your best. So, this is one of the many examples that Douglass gives from his own experience that he makes the most of what he has. Later in the book, he tells stories about other skills he picks up, such as caulking windows. Ultimately, he uses these skills to improve his situation day by day until he gets the end result he wants, which is to escape slavery himself and then stop it altogether. Okay, so what are 2 of my favorite passages from the book? The first one is on page 41. Very soon after I went to live with Mr. and Mrs. Auld, she kindly commenced to teach me the ABC. After I had learned this, she assisted me in learning to spell words of 3 or 4 letters. Just at this point of my progress, Mr. Auld found out what was going on and at once forbade Mrs. Auld to instruct me further, telling her, among other things, that it was unlawful as well as unsafe to teach a slave to read. So, for the explanation, this is one of my favorite passages because it's the point at which Douglass learns how to read and write. Despite it being stopped by his master, the hunger for learning has already been ignited in him. This is a major turning point in the entire book, even though it's so early in the book, because he gets educated, he begins to think for himself, and now he's able to better speak for himself. The ability to read and write, which was prohibited by almost all slave owners, will greatly assist him later in his journey, not only when he has to escape, but also after he escapes. Douglass uses these skills to start an anti-slavery newspaper and to go around the nation making speeches. Alright, so my second favorite passage is on page 136. It required no very vivid imagination to depict the most frightful scenes through which I should have to pass in case I failed. The wretchedness of slavery and the blessedness of freedom were perpetually before me. It was life and death with me. But I remained firm, and according to my resolution, on the 3rd day of September, 1838, I left my chains and succeeded in reaching New York without the slightest interruption of any kind. How I did so, what means I adopted, what direction I traveled, and by what mode of conveyance, I must leave unexplained for the reasons before mentioned. So, explanation. This passage is probably my favorite in the entire book, and I feel like it helps Douglass achieve the purpose he's been trying to get across the whole time. This is after his first failed attempt to escape slavery, where he forged documents, but he was able to throw it in the fire and burn the evidence. So he is already nervous and he's on thin ice. Most people would quit at this point, but he takes a brave leap of faith and uses his preparation to assist him to escape slavery. I know I've never experienced anything close to what he has gone through, but in this moment I can almost feel the emotions he seems to be putting on the paper. The sense of joy and freedom of escaping something that you never thought would be possible to get away from, and the pride and self of achieving such a feat, if you can put it that way, are remarkable feelings that can't be put into words. Okay, so to answer the final question, what does this book teach you? On page 136, he writes, I have been frequently asked how I felt when I found myself in a free state. I have never been able to answer the question with any satisfaction to myself. It was a moment of the highest excitement I ever experienced. I suppose I felt as one may imagine the unarmed mariner to feel when he is rescued by a friendly man of war from the pursuit of a pirate. In writing to a dear friend, immediately after my arrival in New York, I said I felt like one who had escaped a den of hungry lions. So, to explain this quote and what I think it teaches me, this book teaches me to never give up on my dreams despite all the hardships that I might go through, because the feeling of the end result is worth more than anything in the world. It also teaches me that by achieving something that I set my mind to, it makes me feel so much more capable and increase my confidence. This passage displays this because it says how Douglass could not even put into words how he felt, which is completely understandable because he escaped slavery. Escaping the grasp of slavery is a thought that never even crossed his mind at the beginning, but once he set his mind to it, he was able to reach his goal. This is such an important lesson that this book teaches because in the modern world, most people have little to no ambition. Life has gotten so easy with all the technology and new ways of life that just make life simpler and make it easier to do things. But this book shows that despite however hard your goals are, if you really want to achieve them, you must choose them instead of taking the easy way out. In Douglass's case, the easy way out would have been to just not question his slave and to never try to escape. But he set his goal to escape slavery, and he put in the work to do that. And that's why at the end he felt those feelings. As someone who personally has high standards and ambitions, I find this lesson of never giving up to be very valuable and applicable into my own life. And I think it's one of the most important lessons that anyone can ever be taught, whether it's someone telling it to you or you experience it yourself.